children were kicked out by their aunt and uncle without knowing they would inherit $150 million from their parents. Ethan Williams held his sister Emma's hand tightly as two old suitcases rolled beside them on the cracked concrete sidewalk. The two had just been kicked out by the aunt and uncle who had raised them for the past 3 years after their parents lost their lives in a car accident on the highway connecting New York City to the countryside. It was in that moment of despair, with icy tears streaming down the 12-year-old boy's face, that he had no idea his parents had left a fortune worth $150 million waiting for them. "Where do we go now, Ethan?" asked 10-year-old Emma, looking up at her older brother with eyes red from crying. The boy swallowed hard. He didn't know how to answer. Everything had happened so fast. Just that morning, they had been eating breakfast in the small kitchen of their aunt and uncle's house in Brooklyn Heights, New York City, when Uncle Robert exploded over an electricity bill that came in higher than expected. "I can't keep supporting you two anymore," shouted Uncle Robert, a 45-year-old man who worked as a mechanic. "3 years is too long. Pack your things and get out of my house." Aunt Nancy, his wife, was initially shocked by her husband's outburst, but soon joined in the complaints. She worked as an office cleaner and always complained that money wasn't enough to support 4 people. "You're old enough to fend for yourselves now," said Aunt Nancy, crossing her arms. "Your uncle and I have done our part. Now it's time for you to learn how to face life." Ethan tried to argue that they were just kids, that they had nowhere to go, but their aunt and uncle had already made up their minds. In less than an hour, they threw their nephew's few belongings into the 2 old suitcases and pushed them out the door. Now, standing on the sidewalk of Montague Street in the heart of Brooklyn Heights, the siblings didn't know which way to turn. The noise of cars passing on the busy street mixed with the sound of their own uneven heartbeats. "Let's find somewhere to stay until dark," said Ethan, trying to sound stronger than he felt. Emma nodded, blindly trusting her brother. It had always been that way between them. After their parents' passing, Ethan had taken on the role of protector for his younger sister, even though he was only 2 years older. The two began walking through the neighborhood streets, dragging their heavy suitcases. Some people glanced at them curiously, others quickly looked away. It was midweek, around 10 in the morning, and the streets were bustling. After nearly an hour of aimless walking, they reached a small square with a few empty benches. Ethan decided they could rest there for a few minutes to figure out what to do. That was when an elderly woman, around 70 years old, who had been sitting on another bench feeding pigeons, noticed the children's situation. "Kids, are you all right?" the woman asked, slowly standing up and walking toward them. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now, continuing, Ethan looked at the woman warily. He had learned from his parents and later from his aunt and uncle not to talk to strangers, but there was something in the woman's kind eyes that made him lower his guard. "We're looking for a place to stay," Ethan replied, avoiding details. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Parker, immediately sensed something was wrong. 2 kids alone on the street with suitcases, clearly abandoned. "Did you run away from home?" "Mrs. Parker asked, sitting on the bench beside them. "No, ma'am, we were kicked out," Emma answered, her voice trembling. Mrs. Parker felt her heart tighten. Even without knowing the whole story, she knew those children needed urgent help. She had lived alone since her husband passed away 5 years earlier and had always had a special fondness for children. "Listen, I live nearby. How about you come to my house for a snack and we can talk more?" the woman suggested. Ethan hesitated. He didn't know this woman and was afraid it might be some kind of trap. But hunger gnawed at his stomach, and Emma seemed to be growing weaker by the minute. "We don't want to be a bother, ma'am," Ethan said politely. "No bother at all, dear. You'd be keeping me company. It's been so long since I've had visitors," Mrs. Parker replied with a warm smile. The 3 walked a few blocks until they reached a modest but well-kept house on Willow Street. Mrs. Parker had lived there for over 30 years and knew practically all her neighbors. As she prepared sandwiches in the kitchen, the woman talked with the children and gradually pieced together their situation. She was outraged to learn that their uncle and aunt had kicked out 2 minors without any plan or care. "This can't be right," Mrs. Parker murmured as she served the siblings milk with chocolate syrup. Ethan and Emma ate hungrily. It had been hours since they'd had anything in their stomachs. In the rush of being thrown out, they hadn't even finished breakfast. "Mrs. Parker, do you know any place where kids like us can stay?" Ethan asked. The woman thought for a moment. She knew shelters existed in the city, but she also sensed the situation was more complicated than it seemed. These children had family, even if that family had abandoned them. "First, I need to understand better what happened. You said your parents died in an accident. Do you have any other relatives besides your uncle and aunt?" Mrs. Parker asked. "No, ma'am. At least that's what Uncle Robert always told us, that it was just the 4 of us in the world," Emma replied. Ethan nodded in agreement, but something nagged at the back of his mind. He had a faint memory of hearing his parents mention other relatives, but he'd been so young he couldn't be sure. "And your parents? What did they do for work?" Mrs. Parker continued. "Dad was an engineer and Mom was a math teacher," Ethan said. "They always talked about inventions and projects, but I didn't really understand." This piqued Mrs. Parker's curiosity. An engineer and a math teacher weren't common professions among the simpler families she knew. There was something about this story that didn't add up. "Do you know if your parents left anything behind? Documents, important papers?" the woman asked. The siblings exchanged glances. They'd never stopped to think about it. When they went to live with their uncle and aunt, they'd been too young and traumatized by their recent loss. Uncle Robert had handled everything related to paperwork. Uncle Robert said there was nothing left, that our parents had a lot of debts and everything was sold to pay them off, Ethan explained. Mrs. Parker found this strange but didn't want to press the children further. They'd already been through enough trauma that day. "Well, for tonight, you'll stay here with me. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do," the woman decided. Ethan started to protest, saying they didn't want to cause trouble, but Mrs. Parker wouldn't take no for an answer. She prepared the guest room, unused for years, and settled the siblings in. That night, as Emma slept soundly for the first time in weeks, Ethan lay awake thinking. Something about his uncle and aunt's behavior in recent weeks had bothered him. Whispered conversations that stopped when he got close. Hushed phone calls, worried glances. The next morning, Mrs. Parker woke early and prepared a hearty breakfast. "I had decided during the night that I would help those children no matter what. Ethan, Emma, I need to make a few calls today. Do you know your parents' full names?" she asked while serving fresh bread. "Richard Williams Johnson and Jennifer Williams Johnson," Ethan replied. "Why do you want to know?" "I want to understand your situation better. Maybe there are still things your uncles haven't told you," explained Mrs. Parker. The first call she made was to a friend who worked in social services at the City Hall. She explained the situation and asked for guidance on how to proceed. The social worker, named Margaret, grew concerned when she heard the story. Cases of child abandonment were always complicated, especially when family was involved. "Eleanor, these children need immediate support. I'll stop by this afternoon to talk to them," Margaret said over the phone. Meanwhile, Mrs. Parker decided to make a second call. She remembered a neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, who had worked for decades as a clerk at a downtown courthouse. If anyone could help find information about the children's parents, it would be him. "Walter, I need a favor," Mrs. Parker said when the neighbor answered the phone. She explained the situation and asked if it was possible to check whether any documents existed under the names Richard Williams Johnson and Jennifer Williams Johnson at the city's courthouses. "Eleanor, this might take a few days, but I can try. What do you suspect?" asked Mr. Jenkins. "I'm not sure. I just don't buy the story that nothing was left behind by their parents. They were educated people with good jobs," the elderly woman explained. After the calls, Mrs. Parker returned to the kitchen, where Ethan was helping Emma with a drawing she was working on. The domestic scene touched the old woman's heart. "Kids, this afternoon a social worker will come to talk to you. Don't worry, she's a good person who wants to help," Mrs. Parker said. Ethan felt a chill in his stomach. He knew a social worker meant the possibility of foster care, separation from his sister, and more upheaval in their already chaotic lives. "Is she going to take us away from each other?" Ethan asked, pulling Emma close. "I don't know, dear. But we'll do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen, Mrs. Parker promised. The rest of the morning passed slowly. Mrs. Parker tried to distract the children with games and stories, but she could see Ethan growing more anxious. At 2 in the afternoon, Margaret arrived. She was a woman around 40, with a maternal demeanor and a calm voice. She spoke with the children separately and then with Mrs. Parker. "The situation is delicate," Margaret explained. "Technically, the uncles are the legal guardians since they took custody after the parents' passing. They can't just abandon the children." "What happens now?" Mrs. Parker asked. "I need to speak with the uncles first. Understand what led to this decision. Depending on the situation, I may involve Child Protective Services," Margaret replied. Ethan, listening from the living room, felt his world crumbling. He didn't want to go back to his uncle's house, but he was also afraid of the unknown. Margaret noticed the boy's discomfort and knelt to his level. "Ethan, I know you're scared, but my job is to make sure you and your sister are safe and well cared for. I can promise I won't separate you," the social worker said. The promise brought some relief, but Ethan was still uneasy. "Can I go with you when you talk to my uncles?" the boy asked. Margaret hesitated. It wasn't standard procedure, but she understood Ethan needed to feel some control over the situation. "Yes, you can, but you'll stay by my side and just observe. Let Mrs. Parker and me do the talking, okay?" Woke up Margaret. In the late afternoon, the three went to the house in Brooklyn Heights. Uncle Robert was arriving from work when he saw them approaching. His face immediately darkened. "What do you want here?" asked Robert, still inside the car. "Mr. Jenkins, I'm Margaret, a social worker. I need to talk to you about Ethan and Emma," said Margaret, showing her identification. Robert stepped out of the car with a reluctant expression. He knew this could cause trouble for him. "Is Aunt Nancy home?" asked Margaret. "She is, but I don't know what there is to talk about. The kids aren't our responsibility anymore," said Robert, opening the gate. They entered the small but tidy house. Aunt Nancy appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. She was surprised to see Ethan and Emma, but greeted everyone coldly. "Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Nancy, taking custody of minors is a legal responsibility. You can't just abandon them," Margaret began. "We didn't abandon anyone. We just decided we can no longer support them," Nancy defended. "And why make that decision now?" asked Margaret. The uncle and aunt exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "Things have been tough. Robert lost some work days last month, and I had to miss a few days at my job because I was sick. The money isn't enough," Nancy explained. Ethan paid attention to every word. There was something about how they spoke that bothered him, but he couldn't pinpoint what. "Do you receive any government assistance for the children's care?" asked Margaret. Again, the couple exchanged glances before answering. "We get the pension their parents left, but it's barely enough for basic expenses," said Robert. "How much do you receive monthly?" Margaret continued. $2,500, Nancy answered quickly. Ethan found the response odd. He'd overheard many conversations about money between them, and the amount always seemed higher. "Can I see the payment records for the last few months?" Margaret asked. The couple grew visibly nervous. Robert began to sweat, and Nancy fidgeted with the dish towel. "We don't have them here now. Everything's kept at the bank," said Robert. Margaret sensed something was off. Her years of experience working with families had taught her to recognize when people weren't being entirely honest. "That's fine, we can check tomorrow. For now, Ethan and Emma will stay under Mrs. Parker's care. She's offered to help temporarily," Margaret informed. "They can stay wherever they want." "Our responsibility is over," Robert said sharply. Mrs. Parker, who had stayed quiet until then, couldn't hold back. "How can you say that? They're children, your own brother's kids," the woman protested. "My brother's been dead for 3 years. I've done my part. That's enough," Robert retorted. The coldness in his words shocked everyone. Ethan felt tears welling up, and Emma hid behind Mrs. Parker. Margaret decided to end the conversation there. She needed to investigate further before making any final decisions. "I'll come back tomorrow to talk more. Until then, the children will stay under Mrs. Parker's protection," Margaret said, standing up. As they left the house, Ethan turned one last time to look at the place that had been his home for 3 years. Despite everything, he felt a pang of longing and fear for the uncertain future. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Back at Mrs. Parker's house, Margaret said goodbye, promising to return the next day with more information. Before leaving, she pulled the older woman aside. Eleanor, something's not right about this story. Your uncle and aunt are hiding something. I'll look into it more tomorrow, whispered Margaret. I felt it too. The way they talked about the money seemed strange, agreed Mrs. Parker. That night, while the children slept, Mrs. Parker stayed in the living room, thinking over everything that had happened. She decided to call Mr. Jenkins to see if he had discovered anything. Eleanor, I'm glad you called. I found something interesting, Mr. Jenkins said as soon as he answered. What is it? There are indeed records of Richard Williams Johnson and Jennifer Williams Johnson in several notary offices. They had more assets than your uncle and aunt told you. In fact, I found records showing Richard was a partner in a tech company, Mr. Jenkins explained. Mrs. Parker's heart raced. Her suspicions were being confirmed. Walter, can you find out more details about this company? I can try. But Eleanor, if it's what I'm thinking, this story is much more complicated than it seems, Mr. Jenkins warned. What do you mean? If Richard was a company partner and died, there are inheritance issues involved. The children might be entitled to much more than just a pension, he explained. Mrs. Parker spent the whole night unable to sleep, thinking about the implications of what she had learned. If her suspicions were correct, Ethan and Emma could have been victims of something far more serious than simple neglect. The next morning, Margaret arrived early with news. She had spent part of the night investigating the Williams-Johnson family's financial situation. Eleanor, I need to talk to you and the children. I found out some very important things, Margaret said as soon as she arrived. They gathered in the living room. Ethan and Emma were uneasy, unsure what to expect. Kids, did you know your father owned a company? Margaret asked. Ethan thought for a moment. He had vague memories of conversations he'd overheard when he was younger. I remember Dad talking about a company, but I was little and didn't understand, Ethan said. And do you know if your parents left a will or any important documents? Margaret continued. Uncle Robert always said there wasn't anything like that, Emma replied. Margaret and Mrs. Parker exchanged glances. It was becoming clearer that the aunt and uncle had withheld important information from the children. Ethan, Emma, I need to be honest with you. There's a chance your parents left assets and rights you don't know about, Margaret said carefully. What do you mean? Ethan asked, confused. It means you might be entitled to an inheritance your uncle and aunt never told you about, Mrs. Parker explained. The children fell silent, trying to process the information. It was too much for their young minds to grasp the complexity of the situation. What happens now? Ethan asked. We'll find out the truth. But for that, we need a lawyer's help, Margaret said. Margaret knew a family law attorney who could assist them. Attorney Michael Thompson had an office in the city centre and had handled similar cases before. Do you want to come with me there? Margaret asked. Ethan hesitated. Each new piece of information left him more confused and scared, but he knew they needed to uncover the truth. Attorney Thompson's office was in an old building on Wall Street, in the historic heart of New York City. When they arrived, the secretary greeted them and led them to the attorney's office. Mr. Thompson was a man in his 50s with graying hair and a fatherly demeanor. He listened carefully to Margaret's account and the information they had uncovered. Kids, I'll be straight with you. If what we suspect is true, you may have been victims of asset concealment, the attorney said. What does this mean? Asked Emma. It means there might be things that belong to you, but your aunt and uncle haven't told you about them, explained Mr. Thompson simply. The attorney asked for any documents they had from their parents. Ethan remembered that in his suitcase there were some papers Uncle Robert had given them when they left home. They returned to Mrs. Parker's house to retrieve the documents. Ethan opened his suitcase and found a folder with some papers, birth certificates, their parents' marriage certificate, and a few other documents he didn't understand. Mr. Thompson carefully examined each one. When he reached a specific document, his eyes widened. Margaret, look at this, the attorney said, showing her a paper. It was the death certificate of Ethan and Emma's father, but there was something in it that caught his attention. Richard Williams Johnson was registered as a businessman, And here it says he was a partner in a company called NextGen Solutions, explained Mr. Thompson. Is that important? Asked Mrs. Parker. Very important. If he was a partner in a company, his children are entitled to his share, the attorney clarified. Mr. Thompson picked up the phone and started making calls. He wanted to check the current status of NextGen Solutions. After a few calls, he had surprising news. The company still exists and is operating. Richard owned 40% of the shares. With his passing, that stake should have gone to his children, Mr. Thompson explained. Ethan and Emma exchanged glances, not fully understanding what this meant. But our aunt and uncle said there was nothing, Ethan recalled. That's exactly the problem. They may have hidden this from you, the attorney said. Mr. Thompson explained they would need to investigate further, but there were signs the children could be entitled to significant assets. How much money could it be? Ethan asked, curious. I'm not sure yet. I need to check the company's current valuation. But it could be a substantial amount, Mr. Thompson answered honestly. That same day, the attorney began the investigation. He contacted NextGen and discovered the company had grown significantly in recent years. He also looked into the aunt and uncle's situation and found something alarming. They had been receiving not only the children's monthly allowance, but also company dividends that should have been set aside for Ethan and Emma. Margaret, this is worse than we thought, Mr. Thompson said over the phone. The aunt and uncle have been receiving about $15,000 a month in the children's name. Margaret was shocked. This explained a lot about their strange behavior. What are they using that money for? Margaret asked. Apparently, personal expenses. From what I've found, they bought a new car and recently renovated their house, the attorney informed her. When Margaret shared this discovery with Mrs. Parker, the woman was outraged. Those two have been stealing from the children? Mrs. Parker exclaimed. And that's not all. I'm looking into Richard's full estate. It could be much more than we imagined, Margaret said. Ethan and Emma still didn't know all these details. Mrs. Parker and Margaret decided to protect them for now, until everything was confirmed. Meanwhile, Uncle Robert and Aunt Nancy were growing nervous. They had heard through acquaintances that a social worker and an attorney were asking questions about them. Nancy, I think they found out about the money, Robert said, pacing nervously in the kitchen. Calm down, Robert. We didn't do anything wrong. We were using that money to take care of the kids, Nancy defended. Take care of them? We bought an $80,000 car. We spent $50,000 renovating the house. How are we going to explain this? Robert asked. Nancy began to realize the gravity of the situation. They had grown accustomed to the extra money and hadn't thought about the consequences. What do we do now? Nancy asked. We'll have to return the kids and pretend it was all a misunderstanding, Robert suggested. The next day, Uncle Robert called Margaret, saying he had reconsidered the situation and wanted the children back. Mrs. Margaret, we talked it over at home and realized we acted impulsively. We want Ethan and Emma back, Robert said over the phone. Margaret was suspicious of the sudden change in attitude. How interesting, Mr. Robert. Just as we're investigating the children's financial situation, she replied, making it clear she knew something. Robert swallowed hard. His suspicion was confirmed. They had found out about the money. I don't know what you're talking about, he tried to play dumb. I think it's best we talk in person. Tomorrow I'll come by with Mr. Thompson, the children's attorney, Margaret said. After hanging up, Robert told Nancy about the conversation. The two spent the whole night arguing about what to do. Nancy, if they've found out everything, we'll have to return the money, Robert said. What money? We've spent almost all of it, Nancy replied, desperate. It was then that they realized the magnitude of the problem they'd gotten themselves into. The next day, Margaret and Mr. Thompson went to the aunt and uncle's house, accompanied by Mrs. Parker. Ethan and Emma stayed at the older woman's house, waiting. When they arrived, they found Robert and Nancy visibly shaken. Mr. Robert, Mrs. Nancy, we've discovered some important things about the children's situation, Mr. Thompson began. What kind of things? Nancy asked, her voice trembling. We know you've been receiving $15,000 monthly from the children's rights to their father's company, the attorney stated plainly. The silence that followed was awkward. The aunt and uncle knew they'd been caught. We were saving that money for when they grew up, Robert lied. Then you won't mind showing us where that money is being kept, Mr. Thompson said. Robert and Nancy exchanged glances, knowing there was no way to lie about it. "The truth is, we used some of that money to take care of the children," Nancy admitted. "Some? You spent nearly all of it on yourselves," Margaret confronted them. Mr. Thompson then explained the full situation he had uncovered. NextGen Solutions had grown significantly in recent years, and the children's share was now worth about $150 million. The aunt and uncle were shocked by the amount. They had never imagined it was that much money. $150 million, Nancy repeated in disbelief. "That's correct. And as legal guardians, you should have safeguarded every penny for the children," Mr. Thompson said. Robert began to feel sick. The weight of what they had done crashed down on him. "We didn't know it was that much money," Robert said weakly. "It doesn't matter if it was 1,000 or 1,000,000. It wasn't yours," Margaret retorted sharply. Mr. Thompson explained that a full audit would be necessary to track everything the aunt and uncle had received over the past 3 years and how they had used the money. "You'll have to return all of it," the attorney said. "But we can't. We spent it on home renovations, a car, other things," Nancy explained, starting to cry. "Then you'll have to sell everything to repay what belongs to the children," Mr. Thompson replied without mercy. The aunt and uncle's situation grew more complicated by the minute. Not only would they have to return the money, but they could also face legal consequences for misappropriation. "And the children? Who will they stay with?" Nancy asked. "That will be decided by the judge." "But certainly not with you," said Margaret. When they returned to tell Ethan and Emma about the discoveries, the children remained silent for long minutes. $150 million? Repeated Ethan, trying to grasp the magnitude of that number. "That's right, my son. You are very rich," said Mrs. Parker, still processing all that information herself. Emma, who barely understood what so much money meant, asked a question that touched everyone's heart. "And now will we have to leave Mrs. Parker's house?" The girl's question brought up an issue that hadn't been discussed yet. Where would the children live now? "No, my dear. You can stay here as long as you want," said Mrs. Parker, hugging Emma. But Mr. Thompson knew the situation was more complex. They would need to find a legal guardian for the children, someone who could manage the inheritance until they came of age. "Kids, do you have any relatives you know? Someone you trust?" asked the attorney. Ethan thought for a few moments. He had vague memories of visits when he was little, but couldn't recall details. "I remember Dad talked about a cousin, but I don't know the name," said Ethan. "And Mom had a sister who lived in another city," added Emma. Mr. Thompson decided to investigate these relatives. If they existed and were trustworthy, they might be better options than leaving the children in state custody. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the following days, the attorney managed to locate some of the children's relatives. Their father's cousin, Brandon Williams, lived in Boston and had a stable family. Their mother's sister, Amanda Johnson, lived in Philadelphia and also showed interest in helping. When Brandon learned of the situation, he was shocked. He had lost contact with his cousin Richard after the accident and didn't know there were orphaned nieces and nephews. "Mr. Thompson, I tried reaching out to the family several times after the accident, but I was always told the children were well cared for," Brandon explained over the phone. "And who told you that?" asked the attorney. "Richard's brother-in-law, Robert. He always said everything was under control and they didn't need help," replied Brandon. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The uncles had deliberately kept other relatives away to maintain control over the children, and especially the money. Amanda, the mother's sister, shared a similar story. She had tried to visit her nieces and nephews several times, but was always given excuses that they were busy or traveling. "I even went to New York City once, but Robert said the children had chickenpox and couldn't have visitors," Amanda recounted. Mr. Thompson arranged a meeting between the children and these relatives. Ethan and Emma were nervous, but curious to meet family they didn't know existed. Brandon arrived first, accompanied by his wife Jessica and their 2 young children. When he saw Ethan and Emma, his eyes filled with tears. "You look just like Richard when he was little," said Brandon, emotional. The children immediately felt at ease with Brandon. He showed them old photos of their parents, shared childhood stories, and made them feel connected to their roots. Amanda arrived in the afternoon, bringing a photo album of her sister Jennifer. Emma was fascinated seeing pictures of her mother at different ages. "Emma, you have the same mannerisms as your mother when she was your age," Amanda said affectionately. Both Brandon and Amanda offered to take care of the children, but Mr. Thompson explained the decision wouldn't be simple considering the fortune involved. The judge will want to make sure that whoever assumes guardianship has the means and integrity to manage an inheritance of this magnitude, the attorney explained. It was then that Brandon made a surprising proposal. "What if we both took on guardianship together, Helena and me? The children could alternate between our homes, stay connected with both sides of the family," he suggested. The idea pleased everyone. Ethan and Emma liked the possibility of getting to know both sides of the family better. Meanwhile, Uncle Robert and Aunt Nancy's situation grew increasingly complicated. They had been forced to put their house and car up for sale to repay some of the money they had misused. Robert lost his job when the story spread through the neighborhood. Nancy was also fired when her boss found out about the case. The couple's life had become a living hell. "Nancy, how did we get to this point?" Robert lamented, sitting in the empty kitchen of the house being sold. "You were the one who said the money was rightfully ours, that we were taking care of the children," Nancy replied, equally desperate. "I never thought it would come to this," Robert murmured. The truth was, in the beginning, they truly believed they were doing the right thing. But the ease of extra money had gradually corrupted them, to the point where they saw the children as a burden rather than a responsibility. On the other side, Ethan and Emma began adapting to their new reality. Mrs. Parker continued caring for them while the legal matters were resolved, but now with the frequent company of Brandon and Amanda. "Mrs. Parker, when all this is settled, will you still be our family too?" Ethan asked one day. The question touched the elderly woman's heart deeply. In just a few days, those children had brought new purpose to her life. "Of course, my dear. You'll always be my grandchildren in my heart," Mrs. Parker replied, hugging the boy. Attorney Michael Thompson worked tirelessly to resolve the legal situation. He discovered that, in addition to his stake in the company, Richard had registered several patents that also generated royalties. "Your fortune is even larger than we initially calculated. With the patents and company dividends, it likely exceeds 200 million, the attorney informed the children. Ethan and Emma could barely comprehend numbers that large. For them, the most important thing wasn't the money, but finally uncovering the truth about their origins and finding a family that truly loved them. The legal process dragged on for several months. During that time, the children split their time between Mrs. Parker's home, Brandon's house in Boston, and Amanda's home in Philadelphia. Each place offered different experiences. With Brandon, they met cousins their age and felt part of a big, lively family. With Amanda, they learned more about their mother and developed a love for cooking, as Amanda was an excellent chef. But it was at Mrs. Parker's home in Brooklyn Heights where they felt most at ease. The elderly woman had become a grandmother to them, and her house on Montague Street was their safe haven. During this period, Uncle Robert and Aunt Nancy repeatedly tried to reconnect with the children. They sent letters begging for forgiveness and called Mrs. Parker, pleading for a chance to explain themselves. "Ethan, they want to talk to you," Mrs. Parker said one day, showing them a letter that had arrived. Ethan read it with Emma. Robert apologized and said he had always loved his nieces and nephews, that he had made mistakes out of financial desperation. "What do you think?" Mrs. Parker asked. Ethan thought for a long moment. Part of him still missed his aunt and uncle despite everything. They had been his family for 3 years. "I want to talk to them, but only with you and Mr. Thompson there," Ethan decided. Emma agreed with her brother. She also had mixed feelings about her aunt and uncle. The meeting was scheduled at Mr. Thompson's office. When Robert and Nancy arrived, they looked visibly worn out. They had lost weight, had deep dark circles under their eyes, and wore simpler clothes than they usually did. "Ethan, Emma, you don't know how much we've missed you," said Nancy, tears in her eyes. "Aunt Nancy, why did you do this to us?" Emma asked directly. The girl's simple question struck deep into Nancy's heart. She couldn't hold back her sobs. We started using the money for ourselves. Clothes, food, school. But then the temptation grew too strong, Nancy admitted. Did you know it was our money all along? Ethan asked. Robert hung his head. He couldn't lie anymore. We knew, but we thought since we were taking care of you, we had the right to use some of it, Robert said. And when did you decide to kick us out? Ethan pressed. When we realized you'd both turn 18 in a few years and would find out everything. We got scared, Nancy confessed. The honesty of their aunt and uncle, even if late, touched the children. They realized Robert and Nancy weren't bad people. They had just made wrong choices out of greed. Uncle Robert, Aunt Nancy, you hurt us deeply, Ethan said, but we don't want you to suffer forever. How can you forgive us after everything we did? Nancy asked, surprised. Because Mum and Dad taught us to forgive, and Mrs. Parker did too, Emma answered. Mr. Thompson was moved by the children's maturity. Even after so much pain, they showed an incredible capacity for forgiveness for their age. Ethan, Emma, what would you like to happen to your aunt and uncle? The attorney asked. The children exchanged glances. They had discussed this before. We want them to return the money they took, but we don't want them to go to jail, Ethan said. And we want them to visit us sometimes if they promise never to lie again, Emma added. The children's generosity even surprised Mr. Thompson. He had seen many cases where vengeance prevailed, but these two siblings chose forgiveness instead. Robert and Nancy were deeply moved by their niece's kindness. Despite all their mistakes, the children still loved them. We promise we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to make up for what we did, Robert said. And we'll return every penny, even if it takes years, Nancy vowed. Mr. Thompson drafted an agreement where the aunt and uncle committed to repaying all the misused money through asset sales and monthly payments. In exchange, no criminal charges would be filed against them. A few months later, the court's decision was finalized. Custody of Ethan and Emma was shared between Brandon and Amanda, with Mrs. Parker actively involved as a maternal figure. The children's inheritance was placed in a bank-managed trust to be gradually released as they grew older. A portion was made immediately available for education and basic needs. On the day of the final hearing, the whole family was present. Brandon with his family, Amanda, Mrs. Parker, Margaret, Mr. Thompson, and even Robert and Nancy, who had been permitted to attend. When the judge struck the gavel, concluding the case, Ethan stood up and did something that stunned everyone. He walked over to his aunt and uncle and hugged them. "Thank you for taking care of us for 3 years," Ethan said. "You made mistakes, but you also showed us kindness." Emma followed her brother's example. That act of forgiveness moved everyone in the courtroom. After the hearing, everyone gathered at Mrs. Parker's house to celebrate. She had prepared a special lunch for the occasion. "Mrs. Parker, how can we ever thank you for everything you've done for us?" asked Amanda. "You don't need to thank me. These children brought joy into my life when I needed it most," the woman replied. During lunch, Mr. Thompson outlined the plans for the children's education. With the available resources, they could attend the best schools in the country, and when the time came, the finest universities in the world. "But I want you both to decide what you want to study and where you want to live," said Brandon. "The money should help fulfill your dreams, not dictate your future." Ethan, who had always shared his father's interest in technology, expressed a desire to pursue engineering. Emma, inspired by her Aunt Amanda, began developing a passion for cooking and nutrition. "Whatever you choose, we'll support you," said Mrs. Parker. The following months were spent adjusting to their new reality. Ethan and Emma divided their time between studies, therapy to process everything they had been through, and moments of leisure with their newly expanded family. Mrs. Parker officially became their adoptive grandmother. Her home in Brooklyn Heights remained the family's gathering place, especially on weekends. Brandon and Jessica moved to New York City to be closer to the children. Amanda visited monthly, always bringing new recipes to teach Emma. The relationship with Uncle Robert and Aunt Nancy was gradually rebuilt. They faithfully upheld their repayment agreement and visited the children once a month, always accompanied by a responsible adult. "Ethan, Emma, have you truly forgiven us?" Nancy asked during one of these visits. We have, Aunt Nancy. But trust is something that takes time to rebuild, Ethan replied with remarkable maturity. A year after the discovery, NextGen invited Ethan and Emma to learn about their father's legacy. The company had established a research institute in Richard Williams Johnson's name. Your father was a visionary man, said the company's majority partner. His inventions changed countless lives. Ethan felt proud hearing more about his father's work. Emma was moved to see a photo of Jennifer at the Research Institute, where she had also worked before becoming a professor. Would you like the institute to continue bearing your parents' names? The businessman asked. Yes, but we'd also like to add Mrs. Parker's name, Emma said. She saved our lives. The children's suggestion deeply touched Mrs. Parker. The institute was renamed the Richard and Jennifer Williams Johnson Eleanor Parker Research Institute. On the second anniversary of the inheritance discovery, the family held a celebration at Mrs. Parker's home. Everyone was there. Brandon and his family, Amanda, Margaret, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Jenkins, and even Robert and Nancy. During the gathering, Ethan gave a speech that moved everyone. 2 years ago, Emma and I were lost on the street, with nowhere to turn. Today, we have a big family full of love. It wasn't the money that changed our lives. It was the people who embraced and loved us when we needed it most. Money is important, yes, Ethan continued. It will give us opportunities we wouldn't have had otherwise. But what truly matters is the love we've found. Emma joined her brother and added, we want to use our inheritance to help other children who've gone through what we did. No one should feel abandoned in this world. The family decided to establish a foundation to support orphaned or abandoned children. Mrs. Parker would serve as honorary president, Brandon and Amanda as administrators, and Margaret as technical coordinator. Are you sure you want to do this? Mr. Thompson asked. It's a tremendous responsibility. We're certain, Ethan replied. Our parents would be proud. The Williams Johnson Foundation was officially established 6 months later. The first project was building a shelter for children in situations similar to what Ethan and Emma had experienced. The house was constructed in the same neighborhood where it all began, in Brooklyn Heights. Mrs. Parker insisted on personally overseeing every detail of the construction. I want this to be a place where children feel at home, not in an institution, she told the architects. When the house was completed, Ethan and Emma made sure to be the first to show the facilities to the children who would be welcomed there. This will be your home for as long as you need, Ethan told a group of siblings who had just arrived. And we'll visit you all the time, Emma added. Seeing the positive impact they were making on other children's lives gave Ethan and Emma a sense of purpose no amount of money could provide. 3 years after discovering the inheritance, Ethan was preparing to take the entrance exams for engineering at Columbia University. Emma had decided she wanted to study culinary arts and nutrition. You've both grown so much, Mrs. Parker said, watching them study at the kitchen table. You helped us grow too, Ethan replied. Without you, I don't know what would have happened to us, Emma added. Mrs. Parker, now 73, had found new meaning in life through late motherhood. Her home was always full of laughter and activity, just as she had dreamed when she was young. Brandon became a solid father figure for the children. Amanda developed a special bond with Emma, teaching her not just how to cook, but also sharing memories of the mother the girl had never known. Even the relationship with Uncle Robert and Aunt Nancy had stabilized. They had rebuilt their lives, found new jobs, and were faithfully fulfilling the repayment agreement. Ethan, Emma, you taught us what true family love is, Nancy said during one visit. And we learned forgiveness from you, Robert replied. Their transformation was genuine. Regret and the desire to make amends had made them better people. Margaret, who had followed their journey from the beginning, was moved to see how everything had turned out. In 20 years of practice, I've never seen a story with such a beautiful ending, Margaret told attorney Michael Thompson. That's the power of love and forgiveness, the lawyer replied. These children taught us so much about that. On the day of Ethan's high school graduation, the whole family gathered in the school auditorium. Mrs. Parker cried with emotion, watching her heart's grandson receive his diploma. Richard and Jennifer would be so proud, Amanda whispered. They are proud, Mrs. Parker replied. I'm sure of it. During his graduation speech, Ethan spoke about the importance of family and never giving up on dreams, even in the toughest times. 5 years ago, my sister and I were lost on the streets, literally. Today, we're here celebrating achievements that were only possible because good people chose to love us, Ethan said into the microphone. The real legacy our parents left us wasn't money. It was the ability to love, to forgive, and to never give up on family. The audience rose in applause. Many knew the Williams-Johnson siblings' story and were moved by the young man's words. After the ceremony, the family gathered at Mrs. Parker's house for an intimate celebration. The table was overflowing, lovingly prepared by her and Amanda. "Mrs. Parker, you saved our lives that day in the square," Ethan said, hugging her. "You saved mine too, my son," replied Mrs. Parker. "You gave me the family I always wanted to have." Emma, now 15, and already showing exceptional talent in the kitchen, had prepared a special dessert for the occasion. "I created this recipe thinking about our whole family," said Emma as she served the dessert. "It has ingredients from all the places where we were happy." The dessert was delicious, but the most special flavor was the love that had gone into making it. During the celebration, Mr. Thompson made an important announcement. "Ethan, Emma, when you turn 18, you'll have full access to the inheritance. But I want you to know it's grown far more than we expected. Today, it's worth nearly $400 million. The children took the news in stride. Money had stopped being the most important thing in their lives. "Mr. Thompson, we want to expand the Foundation's projects," said Ethan. "We have so many ideas to help more children." "And I want to create a social culinary school," added Emma, "to teach skills to young people in vulnerable situations." The children's dreams had grown with them. They weren't just thinking about themselves, but about how they could change other people's lives. Mr. Jenkins, who had been crucial in uncovering the truth, was at the celebration and grew emotional seeing how everything had unfolded. "Eleanor, when you called me that day, I never imagined I was helping change so many lives," said Mr. Jenkins. "That's how things work, Walter. One good person helping another and kindness keeps multiplying," replied Mrs. Parker. The celebration lasted late into the night. It wasn't just a moment to honor Ethan's achievements, but everything the family had built together. When everyone had left, Mrs. Parker stayed alone with Ethan and Emma in the kitchen, washing dishes as they always did after family gatherings. "You know you're the greatest joy of my life, right?" said the elderly woman, drying a plate. "You're ours too, Grandma Eleanor," replied Emma. It was the first time she had called Mrs. Parker Grandma. The woman's heart swelled with happiness. "Grandma Eleanor. I like the sound of that," she said, smiling. Ethan hugged the two most important women in his life. There, in that simple kitchen in Brooklyn Heights, he was certain he had found the true meaning of family. 2 years later, Emma also graduated high school with honors. She had been accepted into the best culinary school in the country and already had detailed plans for her social school. Ethan was in his 3rd year of engineering at Columbia and working part-time at NextGen, learning about the business he would one day run. The Williams-Johnson Foundation had helped over 200 children in its 3 years of operation. The Brooklyn Heights shelter had become a model for other cities. "Did you see how everything fell perfectly into place?" said Margaret during a visit to the foundation. "It was fate," replied Mrs. Parker. "No, it was love," corrected Ethan. "The love you had for 2 lost children on the street. And the love you chose to have for your aunt and uncle, even after everything," added Margaret. Robert and Nancy had managed to pay off 50% of their debt and were working hard to settle the rest. Their relationship with Ethan and Emma had become healthy and respectful. "You gave us a second chance when we didn't deserve it," said Robert during one visit. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Uncle Robert. You just had to learn from your mistakes," replied Ethan. The siblings' maturity and wisdom impressed everyone who knew them. They had turned pain into growth, abandonment into love, and betrayal into forgiveness. Amanda remained a constant presence in the children's lives. Her home in Philadelphia had become their school vacation spot, where Emma honed her cooking skills. Brandon and Jessica had permanently moved to New York City and lived just a few blocks from Mrs. Parker's house. Their children had become Ethan and Emma's chosen siblings. "I never imagined our family could grow so much," Brandon said during a Sunday lunch. "Family isn't just about blood," Mrs. Parker replied. "It's about choice, love, and care." Her home had become the gravitational center of their extended family. It was where important decisions were made, achievements celebrated, and comfort found in difficult times. The end. What did you think of this story of resilience and family? Do you believe Ethan and Emma made the right choices in forgiving their uncle and aunt? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more heartwarming stories.